Yet the more closely she saw him working, the deeper she realized that he was communicating with her through the language of food. It was something she thought was exclusive to her and maybe Julia Child. Carefully repressing the fork along the edge of each ravioli fold that he stuffed with ricotta and spinach. He took such care with each detail of the process. Selecting the 12-inch ceramic pan, he cranked the dial of the stove and mashed the ignition button, near it simultaneously. It was as if he'd worked in this space all the time, like he was conducting an orchestra with the crackle and snap of the pilot. An oversized pot was filled with 6 cups of water and a teaspoon of salt, then brought to a boil. Each ravioli was placed into the pot with the care of baby sea turtles being released into the wild. What appeared to be an arbitrary amount of extra virgin olive oil glugged into the pan, already bathed in heat, shimmered by the flames licking beneath it. A sprinkle of Himalayan sea salt and a dash of cinnamon sizzled as it met with the oil moving about the surface of the hot ceramic. An inventory of chopped rocket, matchstick-cut apple pieces, a pile of goat cheese crumbles, and various flavorful spices had been lined out on the cutting board. Embarrassed to chop another thing after his culinary display, she tore the pieces of spinach and romaine lettuce to toss with the pre-chopped pine nuts, dates, cranberries, Parmesan and Romano cheeses. Once the roll was to Dalton's liking, she watched him add the raviolis, pushing them around the pan with a wooden spoon. He turned to just above a simmer, drizzling a balsamic concoction over the ravioli and apple mixture. What happened next? She could have only dreamed. An arrangement of Stand By Me by Florence and the Machine started. With that, Dalton fed one of the stray matchstick apples, cooked in cinnamon balsamic bliss, to an unexpecting Ava. Extending his hand, he softly asked, "May I have this dance?" Her eyes fixed on his. The slightest nod of approval was all she could muster. The closing of her eyes, he took her closely in his arms, and they began to sway. She hadn't slow danced with anyone since her girlfriend's wedding over 10 years earlier. Got shoved aside at the realization that she was actually dancing with someone that wanted to dance with her. Time became abstract and nearly halted, much like the instant before a firefight, she thought. It was at the back of her neck that caused her eyes to open once more as she bit her bottom lip over his shoulder. As their cheeks pressed into one another's, he could feel her lips meeting his jawline by his ear, standing all the hairs on the left side of his body on end. Just his lips parted and his eyes tightened shut. Her warm lips found his. Several deep breaths, both drinking in one another's energy. A simultaneous waft of the sweet balsamic aroma stirred them to reality. Relieved to have finally crossed that threshold, they both collected themselves with various intermittent stages of laughter. Dalton kissed her forehead once more and turned to stirring the food as Ava rummaged through a nearby drawer for a corkscrew. The dark Spanish Syrah poured into her stemless wine glass like a magician preparing a masterful reveal. Even the way he poured it had her mesmerized as a child making a grand discovery. The glasses touched and they sipped. Having experienced wines from the regions they originated in those locations was something Ava loved being able to share and enjoy. She wasn't really one for any other sort of alcohol, but had a respect for the process of wine. Dalton was sure when he could afford to, developed a keen sense for what worked and what consulted Wine Library TV on YouTube when he had questions. Adding a light poppy seed dressing to the salad, plated next to the ravioli and apple creation, Dalton clapped his hands once as he remembered something. Diving back into one of his own brown paper bags that he'd brought, he recovered a clear plastic bag, twisty-tied with actual homemade croutons for the salad. "You really went all out for this, didn't you?" She half meant it as a point of humor that was completely missed by the very serious would-be chef. With the first few bites of their simple, complicated lunch, he waited for some indication of approval, and just before he was going to solicit her for her review, she spoke up. Where'd you learn to cook like this? And who knew? Dalton, this is amazing. Thank you. Our mother knew how to keep me busy as a young man. Or my grandmother knew how to keep me busy as a young man. I had a tendency to be a bit mischievous, but she figured I could only get into so much if I was right there with her. Sweet and savory were balanced just right, complemented by the tannins, and every forkful made more than her stomach happy. Her plates sat empty for some time as they laughed, sharing more and more, before he stood to take them to the sink. Dalton grabbed the one remaining paper bag that hadn't been ransacked for the ingredients he required, pulling out 2 gigantic peaches and 3 blood oranges. Ava thought quickly enough to grab the cutting board to rinse it off, handing it back to him. He stood his ground, drawing her in. For a second, welcome kiss. Thank you, elicited equally as sweet of a no problem. Sparkled with electricity when they met in such close quarters. Just as earlier, the knife in his hands carved up the fruit as if it were being staged for a cooking show. The peaches halved and the blood oranges diced into perfect eighths and peeled. Ava looked on as he heated the raw sugar in the small cast iron skillet he requested. The hiss of the pieces as they combined with the hot syrup even made Dalton smile, as his sheer enjoyment in the act of cooking shone through. He just before the refrigerator, asking her to retrieve the glass bowl of cream he snuck in there when he arrived. She pulled the plastic off the top, balling it in her hand as she dragged her index finger right through the middle of it. Ava sucked the thick, white swath of fluffy richness from her finger to get a chart-topping surprise at the perfection she found herself sampling. There's no way you made this. A sharp, innocent glance up at her with, I most certainly did, was all he could afford as he concentrated on flipping the orange pieces, each a golden glaze encrusted treasure that made her mouth water as she reeled from taste bud overload. Half of a peach would have been enough to fill her tummy, but when he filled the peach pit with a blossom of blood oranges and dropped a dollop of whipped cream, she pondered up to the challenge. The two enjoyed those bowls of sautéed sweetness for short of another hour before again Dalton collected their dishes, insisting on straightening her kitchen before she departed for her trip. He washed and she dried, then either found the appropriate home for the dish for hers or put his into a reusable bag. The paper bags he brought them in were mostly all tattered by the time he arrived. Ava swatted the dish towel at Dalton's stomach playfully, which he promptly caught. The damp towel served as a lure, pulling her to him with ease. A gentle kiss initiated the embrace as they melted into each other's arms, where they remained for nearly 5 minutes, in silence, aside from the occasional quiet grunt or moan between the two. I'm going to miss you while you're away. Really? You think so? How much? She inquired as a single finger brushed the tip of his nose. I'll miss you so much that... He stalled jokingly, causing her to swipe at him with half of the towel she managed to snatch from his loosened grip. Okay, all right. I'll miss you so much that I'll keep my phone on me, charged and on full volume until you're back in my arms, no matter what I'm doing. If you call or message me, I'll stop that immediately, giving you my undivided attention. She could tell he was serious, and she'd never been presented with such an inclusive offer. A quick kiss found its place on his lips before she replied with a flash of a smile. You do me anyway, she winked. Dalton begrudgingly began getting his shirt and jacket on, checking the current weather condition through the sliver of glass at the side of the door. She made her way over to him with the canvas bags of his containers and tools, a few leftovers for him stacked neatly on the bottom as he tied his second shoe. He hugged her with his heavy arms around her neck, his chin resting lightly on the top of her head. Her ear listened closely in hopes of hearing his heartbeat. David slid up the top layer to feel it, as they both sighed heavily for a moment. kiss out of the way. I was really worried I was going to botch the whole thing. Oh, I've definitely had better, she joked as she looked up into his face. Their smiles fizzled as they engaged in one last kiss. One for the record books, in fact. He nearly tripped over the door jamb, stepping backwards out of the door, arms full of everything. The near-missed step went unnoticed as he made his way to his truck. The rain had stopped for the moment, and his breath created a fog so heavy his dark beanie cap disappeared into it as she looked on. Since college, she was going to truly miss someone while she left for a trip of any length of time. Thank you so much for your attention. I appreciate a moment, 2 moments, 3 or 4, but to give me your attention for the entire reading of Chapter 8 is really, really inspiring. So I thank you for plugging in here on Patriot Heart Radio. As we close the show, I want to just solicit, if you're from a faith perspective, if I could just solicit some prayers of support, thoughtful intention toward a service member and her husband. He has been the phenomenal father that has stepped up, taking care of all the kids as she has undergone one of dozens of surgeries. She is a former Marine, and he is a former Army service member, and together they are one amazing team. And so I just want to lift up this soldier specifically, who is in the hospital right now with a very, very intense situation that has been recurring. It's the severity is escalating, and I just solicit your intention for this veteran family. Please join us next week for Chapter 9. I want to thank you for making Patriot Heart Radio one of your parts of the week. If you're just joining us, I encourage you to shoot back, listen to the previous chapters, or you can find me on Facebook. Doc Collins, DOCCOLLINS. You can join the fan page. You can find me on Facebook and check out all the previous chapter reads of 1,300 hours from each week on Facebook Live. You can find me on Snapchat at Patriot Heart Doc, all lowercase, all spelled out. On Twitter at Real Doc Collins. On Instagram at Patriot Heart Media, all spelled out, Patriot Heart Media. Or you can email me if you have something that you don't want to have posted to the wall and you don't want to throw a message into the DM. I would encourage you, please send an email to doc@patriotheartpress.com. Folks, thank you so much once again for making Patriot Heart Radio part of the Dangerous Grounds Network, yours this week and next. We'll see you next week, Chapter 9. I'm your host, veteran and author, Doc Collins. Have a great week.